Welcome to the Balance Blueprints podcast, where we discuss the optimal techniques for finances and health, and then break it down to create an individualized and balanced plan. I'm your host, Justin Gaines, here with my co-host, John Pover. In this episode, John and I break down the psychology of money, how to accept where you currently are, and then make a plan for where you want to go. Thank you for listening. We hope you enjoy. We talk a lot about the things that we should do and what's optimal, but then naturally we also constantly are bleeding into in episodes. If you can do suboptimal, and that's just because you don't have the muscles built yet, and you'll get to optimal and all that stuff. But we never really break it down, so I figured it'd be good to do an episode on why we feel more comfortable, even if we know on paper it's not the best option.
Right.
So
yeah,
and it'll be able to be conversational too, because we can even dig into you need some life insurance, but you haven't taken a step on it. So we can also dig into that of having an actual one-on-one conversation about what reservations do you have, and do you actually know that you need it, or do you think you don't need it, and break that down.
Yeah, that'd actually probably be good, especially for other people, because I know I'm sure I'm not the only person that obviously procrastinates it.
Yeah. Well, and a lot of people do, and a lot of times it's the comfortability thing. I had a client this week that we literally in the meeting, he wanted me to sell him something that was completely suboptimal. And I was like, we're not doing that. We're not doing that. We'll do this other suboptimal, but still efficient for you process. It's always funny too, when I'm talking to clients and in that situation, I'm literally decreasing my income because I'm it's not what works. It's not the best option for you.
Yeah.
So, but that's ultimately what ends up winning sales, is they understand that they're actually working with somebody who appreciates ethics and understands the processes and is concerned about the client and not about how much they're making at the end of the day. Yeah.
I think even obviously our shared interest from a long time ago of psychology and just stuff like that, that's what helps sell too, because it's not just about the money. It's more of a person approach, which obviously always talking about.
Yeah. I mean, ultimately, and that's why understanding the psychology of money is so important, is because all sales, regardless of whether or not it's you buying your food at the grocery store or buying a life insurance policy or buying a car or buying a house, they're all driven by emotions.
Yeah.
They're all
the marketing on packages and stuff. That's what makes
it's how does it make me feel? Especially in the culture and the society we live in now. It's how does it make me feel? Does it make me feel good? Because if it makes me feel good, then it's okay. Right. And that's not necessarily good. That's not necessarily true and accurate.
No. Yeah, that's bittersweet, because it's good in terms of there's so many options. It's you almost have to stand out. You have to make someone feel good. But yeah, on the other side of it, if it just makes you feel good, and that's why you're doing it.
Well, and feeling good, I would argue that most of my client meetings, it's not about feeling good. Most of my client meetings, it's going to require you to feel very uncomfortable. We have uncomfortable conversations, and it does not feel good.
Yeah.
But it's going to put you into a position where long-term, your life satisfaction is going to increase, because you're having the uncomfortable conversation now in your 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, instead of having the uncomfortable conversation in your 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, when you're oh, I don't have any money now. Or, it could be we're having an uncomfortable conversation today, so that if, God forbid, you ever had a house fire or a big car accident, or, an employee stole money from you, we're prepared for that, and it's less painful. So, it's a matter of having the uncomfortable conversations now, so that we can then be in a more comfortable position. Because what was comfortable for us when we were kids isn't the same thing that's comfortable for us now. And that's only because of the things we've learned, the things we've been taught. And that's the biggest issue with financial education, is that what is comfortable for us is what we got taught by our parents. And if our parents weren't in a strong financial position, then what we're being taught isn't going to be optimal. The other thing is your parents could have been in a strong financial position, but you're not taking the same life paths that they are, or don't have the same goals. And now you're also making suboptimal decisions. Mm-hmm. There's a reason why the rich get richer and the poor get poorer.
Yeah.
Some of it's economic, some of it's the system, but a lot of it is understanding what you were taught and the tools you have about finances may not be accurate. You may need to rewire your brain on those things.
Yeah. No, that's interesting, because I've always probably understood this, but this is the first time it's getting talked about, and it's really clicking in terms of, for both of us, I think one of the hardest things you have to sell is like that ability to see into the future and say, do the hard stuff now for, you're selling delayed gratification, which is basically one of the hardest things to do, especially
in a world that loves instant gratification. You're right. We're selling delayed gratification.
Yeah. Health, finances, you're selling delayed gratification. And, I think there's probably we'll talk about this too, but a spectrum, because you do too many health things, and everyone likes to say, I've gotten this comment so many times, like, all this just to be hit by a bus. And it's like, it's the dumbest thing you can say. But at the same time, like, I do get it. You don't want to go too far and just only think about the future. That's kind of where I'm at now. I still want to lean towards that way, but it's definitely an interesting scale to be on and to figure out the right one.
Well, it's why I use the analogy with my clients of every professional sports team that wins championships has a strong offense and a strong defense. Now, the offense is the one who sells the tickets. They're the ones that get the viewership. That's why you watch these sports games. You watch the sports games to see the goals, to see the touchdowns, to see all of these things. Very few people watch sports because they're like, wow, I love this defensive tackle, or I love this center back on the soccer team.
I love the score being 0-0 the entire
game. The goalie's amazing. It has all these crazy cool saves. That's why I watch the game. It's like a lot of people aren't in that capacity, but that's what our job is. Our job is to develop the defensive strategy of your financial position, of your health position, so that you can have the offensive performance.
Yeah.
Because if you have a really strong offensive team that scores a ton of touchdowns or scores a bunch of goals, but they also let in a bunch of goals and allow a bunch of touchdowns to be scored on them, they might not be winning. They might not be getting ahead in life.
Yeah.
And we're there to say, listen, I know it's not glamorous, I know it's not pretty, and I know it's not fun to talk about this, but what is your defensive strategy? What is your plan? Because, yes, you could get hit by a bus. You could do all of your health things and you can get hit by a bus.
Yeah.
What happens, though? How quickly do you recover from that injury? Are you killed completely? Because, if you look at bus accidents, most people who get hit by a bus aren't killed. They're injured. And so how quickly are you recovering from that injury? Yeah. Now, if you're physically fit and in good health, you're going to recover a lot quicker than somebody who's overweight, not in good health, and hasn't been taking care of themselves. And so it's because we took a little bit of a sacrifice here, had a defensive strategy that allows us to get back into the game stronger, faster, quicker. And it's the same is true in finances. Run with the same analogy. You get hit by a bus and you're out of work. Well, now you have loss of income. But did you have a defensive strategy for loss of income? Did you have a disability policy in place? Did you have, any of the other protective strategies? Say you did get killed. Did you have a life insurance policy in place so that now your kids and spouse don't have to take on the financial burden of not having your income coming into the household?
Right.
All these things cost you a little bit of money. On paper, set you back or put it so that you can't put things into investments aggressively. But at the end of the day, if you look at it from a holistic viewpoint, it's these defensive strategies that allow you to be able to stay in the game longer, get back in the game when things go south, and just not be able to get knocked out when you get punched, but instead get knocked down and be able to get up much faster.
Yeah. I don't know why I don't know if it's a cultural thing or what, but the ability to have like the deeper, harder conversations, not just about finances, but almost all topics. Seem like so many people shy away from it. Even when we say in this conversation, it does kill you. It still gives you that feeling of like, oh, is this too dark to talk about? But it's like, it's not.
Well, the other reaction that most of us will have is that's not going to happen to me.
Right.
That might happen to somebody else. It's not going to happen to me. We all, from a
psychological
that's a bold
statement.
but psychologically, that's what our brains are hardwired to think, is that we are doing things to prevent that from happening. Therefore, it won't happen.
Yeah.
But it's not reality. But I think that's what it is, and I think part of it too is, we had a female's perspective in on this conversation. Their female clients typically get these things much faster than male clients do, and I think that has to do with the psychology of it. Mm-hmm. There's the psychology of the female brain from an evolutionary standpoint is the protector, or not the protector, is the one who's going to maintain order, maintain the family structure, and protect from inside. Whereas the male dominant structure is go out, kill, and protect from the outside and protect from an aggressive standpoint. So we are more likely as males to want to go do the risky, dangerous things. And our female counterparts want to do the opposite. They want to be more conservative, more firmly planted, stable. And so they're going to understand these topics much faster, much easier, because they're more risk averse. There's a reason why, there's all those jokes of like, if you want to do something dumb, go hang out with the guys. If you want to find the smart way to do it, go see how the girls do it. It's because one's taking on a ton of risk and the other one's not taking on a ton of risk. And there's reasons why you can make those generalized statements, and generally speaking, they tend to be accurate. And it's because of the psychology. It has to do with the hormones and the chemicals released in your brain that just make you more likely to have a higher or lower appetite for risk. Yeah. And that's even, you go outside of the gender roles. My appetite for risk and your appetite for risk are very different.
Yeah.
Very different.
Definitely.
And that's not to say that your appetite for risk is more feminine. That's not what I'm saying at all. It's the case of what you're willing to take on for risk is very different than mine. And I also tell people I'm willing to take on a ton of risk, but it's calculated risk. I'm not just willy-nilly shooting from the hip. And
right.
And that's where the psychology of money starts to play in is, I wasn't taught these things at a young age. I've taught myself them over a longer period of time. And so as I grow, as I get older, I am continuing to increase what I call my stress capacity and my risk capacity. And that's what I try to do with clients is, well, a lot of times when we're talking in our podcast about what's optimal, what's suboptimal, we have to start at suboptimal in order for you to build your risk tolerance and your stress load capabilities so that then you can move into this higher risk situation. Higher risk isn't necessarily a bad thing if it's calculated. If you have a defensive and an offensive strategy working together, that's managed risk. If you have just an offensive strategy with no defensive strategy, that's just high risk with no management of it. It's all or nothing.
I think it's always important. We've said this probably before too, is, suboptimal doesn't mean bad either, because if you're doing nothing, suboptimal is better than nothing, right. So we always talk about that. But
and realistically, you're always doing suboptimal because
that's true.
to achieve perfect efficiency and perfect performance, you would have to have the perfect balance of stress load and stress capacity. You'd have to know the most amount of information. And then you'd also have to be in a position to actually take action on all of those things. And it's very rare for you to be in a position where you have all three of those.
It's unreal that you're working towards it always. I don't know if you're ever achieving it, probably.
Right. You're constantly working towards increasing those capacities, increasing your strongholds. And that's where I think this black and white viewpoint of I'm either there or I'm not, it just really, it's not realistic.
Yeah. You run into that in both of our worlds so much of, it's either this or that. And it's hard to get out of. I mean, I've been in that thinking a lot, especially for health stuff. And it's easy to get into, I think, probably because even what we talked about before, like there's so many options, there's so much middle ground that I think it's just easy to be like, I need a belief to hold on to. And maybe that's, something you grasp on, because it's like, it's yes or no. That's much easier than it's maybe, because there's a million maybes, and I know I'm taking it a little too far, but yeah, it's hard to get out of black and white thinking sometimes.
Well, and it's because I'll run us through an exercise that I do with my clients, and I'll use you like you're the client, and then I'll explain why you're having the reactions you are. But to not get like super deep and not take up a ton of time, I'll kind of broad brushstroke it. But how do you feel about your financial position?
Are we doing like a 1 to 10? What's easier?
Sure. If you're comfortable with a 1 to 10, we can do it that way. 10 is optimal, perfect. 1 is I'm struggling and like there needs to be major changes because I just can't live day to day like this. Where on that range do you fall?
I feel like a 4.999 repeating of like almost neutral.
Okay.
But slightly.
What are you ranking that against?
What do you mean? Like what's causing it?
Yeah. Why 4.99? You're comparing it to something. What are you comparing it to?
I guess just the feelings I have of like, I have a good savings, but I feel like I'm at that next step of you can either use it well or you can use it poorly, so that there's a little of that extra stress, I guess, there of you have it right now, but it seems like a point in my life where it could branch very quickly.
So define good and poorly of using it.
Using it towards something that will gain me more, or using it towards something that will gain, because we're talking money or experience. I could use it in a way that gains me more experience, but I lose all the money, and that's technically good.
So you don't even like that. Like, technically good means that you're trying to justify.
Yeah, because I hate the feeling of, when you've worked so. My biggest thing that probably ties into what you're looking for is when you've worked so long and so hard to, say, pay off debts, get past zero. It's almost more paralyzing when you have the money than when you actually don't. Because for me, it's
because of the opposite.
Well, just because you don't want to, you're almost more scared to lose it. If I had nothing, and I don't know, because I when I was in the position before, I just worked. That was the answer. But now when I have it, it's kind of like I want to use it wisely. I don't want to go back to where I've been. Like, those things start coming into play, versus if you just had nothing, you'd be like, well, I have no choice, but I better just go make.
Right. So you're between a rock and a hard spot, so you can only move forward on that other one, versus right now you have a lot of fear and excitement kind of playing in. But it sounds like more fear driving you.
Definitely.
I don't want to make the mistakes. And it's interesting, you said something too of the answer I'm looking for, which is not uncommon for clients to say, but I'm not looking for an answer. Like, the answers that I'm looking for is what you genuinely feel.
Yeah.
Because if I don't know how you feel about money and how you feel about your position, then I don't know how to coach you to then make the next step and make the forward progress. Because a lot of times what you're doing is in your mind, you have constructed a model of what you are capable of and where you should be today. And that model is always not where you are today. That model is always in the future.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the problem with that is you're constantly judging yourself against, does this model equal what I am today? And we always push that model to be greater than where we are today. But we always look at it as a today metric, not where is this model going to put me in a year versus where I am today. And so the model typically is based off whatever we think is normal, whether that's from a societal standpoint, from a family standpoint, a relational standpoint. Where are my friends? We're constantly benchmarking ourselves. The problem is we're benchmarking ourselves against things that have thousands of outside variables that have nothing to do with what we are or who we are or what we're doing, but we use that as a benchmark. The number one thing that's going to hold you down is if the benchmark you're using you eventually obtain, you're now going to have another problem where your benchmark's actually holding you back because you've met your benchmark. You've met whatever the average is or whatever you're trying to achieve. And a lot of times this happens with people. Most people will end up in that situation because the lower the starting point as far as like net worth goes or budgeting goes, say if you're at a negative budget, you're constantly living paycheck to paycheck, where you want to get to and what the model is that you want to move towards typically is only a few steps ahead of where you are. And so you want to get to it. If you're living paycheck to paycheck, clients typically want to get to a spot where they're not living paycheck to paycheck. And there's a little bit of breathing room there. But when you reach that point, now you take a break and then you reassess and you're like, okay, now I want more breathing room. And I want more. And it's because you're constantly building a model that you're reaching after instead of stepping back and saying, where am I today? Where do I want to be in 6 months, in a year? And then celebrating that win when you actually achieve it. And then moving on and saying, okay, let me be honest where I am today and where do I want to be in 6 months and a year. So I have on my board, I'm constantly benchmarking, where am I today? Where do I want to be in a year? And based off these growth metrics, where am I going to be in 3 and 5 years? Mm-hmm. 3 and 5 years really don't matter, right? Because that's all extrapolation based off where I get from the
what you're doing the day to day. Yeah.
It allows you to have something you're striving towards, but that is benchmarked based off of the reality of your situation and what you actually want to achieve. Mm-hmm. Because when I'm asking you those 1 to 10 scale questions, it's not from a perspective of, okay, this is where I am, this is where I want to be. The 1 to 10 at the beginning just says like, okay, where do you think you are? Do you think you're really good financially? Do you think you're not so good? You were right in the middle, which is a good spot to be because it means that you realize you've overcome things, but you also realize there's things for you still to obtain. So realistically, on that 1 to 10 scale, you want somebody to say that they're in a 5 because, or close to it, because that means that they recognize they've overcome things and they're better off than where they were, and that they have more room to go somewhere.
Yeah.
The people who are in the 1s and the people who are in the 10s, the 1s are overcritical of themselves. You know, the 1 through 3s, they're overcritical of themselves and they're not celebrating their wins. If you take somebody who's living paycheck to paycheck and doesn't have money left over, there are still wins, because the reason they're in that position is because of some sort of situation that's holding them back and holding them down, but that they've actually overcome portions of that because they still wake up, they still get out of bed, they still, I mean, if you're living paycheck to paycheck, but you have a deficit, you're still showing up to work, you still have a paycheck.
Yeah.
You know, you still have an income, you need to celebrate that. And then you have the person who's making, you know, say they're making 6 figures and they think they're on top of the world, and typically are like super arrogant and just buy all these lavish things, and they're like, I've made it. In 5 years, they're going to be dealing with depression, anxiety, and they're going to feel like they're a 1 or a 2 because their lifestyle creep is going to catch up to them, and they're going to be living paycheck to paycheck even though they're making 6 figures and had a big buffer in their budget. And it's because they didn't recognize that there are still opportunities for me to grow, and I've overcome a ton of stuff. You have to celebrate the wins, and you have to be honest with yourself and recognize that there's still opportunities for you to go after and to achieve. And so if we stop benchmarking ourselves against other people and we start benchmarking against ourselves and what our reality position is, that's what's going to allow you to just be honest with yourself, recognize it, accept it, and then work towards actually growing your financial strongholds. I think all too often in a society where we can scroll on Facebook, we can scroll on TikTok, Instagram, all these social media platforms, and just get any sort of endorphin rush that we want, and also be able to measure ourselves against other people. Oh, I'm not doing that. I'm not achieving this. I'm not at that level. We're benchmarking ourselves against the wrong things.
Yeah. Well, that was one thing that you brought up earlier too that stood out to me also is, whether you're comparing it to your close friends, your parents, peers around you, but then you have this fake world of fake money online that kids, you know, I think I saw one this morning. It was like a 14-year-old entrepreneur, 170,000 followers. And you're just looking at it. You're just thinking, man, like, you know, I would have never seen this, and good for him. Nothing obviously against that, but it definitely affects you in terms of you just sit there looking at it like, man, half my age almost, like, what am I doing?
But you're also boiling that person down to one number.
Definitely. That's why it's
like
fake.
You're boiling it down to one number. Their entire life, their entire person, who they are, is boiled down to one number. How many followers do they have? And then because you know that number, you're then extrapolating, okay, with that number of followers, you can generate this kind of revenue. And it's not taking into account the whole person. Psychology has shown that once you break $60,000 of income per year per person, your level of happiness does not increase beyond that point. So from $0 of income a year to $60,000 a year of revenue, of income, your happiness increases as your pay increases. But once you break 60,000, there is no increased level of happiness achieved by pay raises as a result of that increase in income.
Did you know why that is? Was it because or not?
From a investment financial person standpoint, risk management standpoint, I think it's because at $60,000, you can $60,000 a year per person, you can cover your personal needs without, you can't go and buy all the lavish stuff. You know, you might be able to go on a vacation once a year, but it's not going to be the craziest of vacations. But it's a case of once you break that threshold, you can go buy more stuff. You can go do more things. But you can't buy the important things in life. Yeah. You can't buy family.
What actually bring
buy relationships. You can't buy emotional connection with people. But below $60,000, you have a lot of stress from being able to cover your rent, your car payment if you need a car, your budget for food, all of those things that are bare bones basic needs. You're struggling to cover those. Once you hit 60,000, you're able to cover those and you're able to have some fun stuff.
Yep.
Over 60,000, you're just increasing the amount of fun stuff you have, but you can also buy things to comfort yourself for not having the things that actually matter.
That matter. Yeah. I was just going to say, I think we've obviously gone a lot and great information about the psychology behind it, but what are some tips then? I know you kind of mentioned obviously starting at suboptimal, working up. Do you have anything else then? How do you get kind of a better view on money?
It's less about the money and it's more about just being real with yourself, focusing on the mental component and recognizing this is where I am today. This is who I am. Strip off the emotion, strip off all of the ancillary details, strip off the benchmarking and the comparing that you're doing. Write down on paper, who are you actually from a strictly number standpoint? Where are you today? Who are you from a number standpoint today? And then accept it. It doesn't matter what it is. It doesn't matter if your net worth is negative. It doesn't matter if your balance, your income statement is negative. That does not matter. What matters is that you actually accept that that is the reality. Don't make an excuse for it. Don't do any of that stuff. Strip it all off. Break it down to just numbers that are very black and white, because it's either going to be a positive or a negative number. And that's strictly from the fact that numbers are, plus or minus in front of it. Don't, just because it's a deficit, don't say that that's a negative thing. Don't say that it's a positive thing if you have a positive as well. Accept what it is, and then ask yourself, what are the action plans to take going forward? And that's what I do with my clients, is we strip you down to just what are the numbers? What are the numbers? And then we say, okay, where do we want to be? Because once we have the numbers and we've accepted that, we can set that aside. That is who we are today. There's no changing that. That is who we are. Where do we want to be? Now let's talk about the emotions. Now let's talk about what we want to get to. And let's make that the target. And then we're going to cancel out all the outside noise. We're not going to worry about what our friends want. And that's the other tough part, is that conversation about what we want takes a while. It's a long conversation, because I have to ask you, you're going to tell me what you want, and I'm going to challenge it. Why do you want that? One of the best conversations I ever had was my cousin was going to college, and we were talking about what he wanted to do, what his interests were. And he said, I'm really interested in this one thing, but there's no money in that. There's no money in that field. I can't make a lot of income. I go, okay. I said, how much money do you want to have? How much money do you want to make? And he threw out a number, whatever. I said, okay, let's flash forward. Let's just play in the hypothetical world right now. I'm going to write you a check for $1 million. Not that I could actually do this in this situation, but I'm going to write you a check for $1 million. You get to put it in your bank account, but you cannot spend a single penny of it. Are you satisfied? Well, no, I'm not satisfied. Like, okay, it's not the money you want. What are the first things you're going to buy with it? And this is a lot of times what I ask the questions for. I've even done it once with a client who was being very stubborn with me, as I took a check out and I wrote it. I made sure that it would never actually be able to be cashed. I marked it all up, scratched a whole bunch of stuff out, but I wrote him a check for $1 million. And I handed it to him. I said, here you go. I said, you can cash it, you can put it in the bank, but you can't do anything else with it. You cannot touch it. Just sits there in the bank. The only thing you can do is you can point to it. You can show your friends you have $1 million in the bank. You cannot spend it. You cannot do anything with it. Are you satisfied? Most people will say no. Most people will say, no, I'm not satisfied. What good is it? I can't do anything with it. Exactly, because the money is not what you want. You want what the money gets you. Mm-hmm. So now let's talk about that. And so in this situation, it was, I'd love to have a yacht one day. I'd love to be able to have a helicopter that I could ride around on that. And I'd love all these things. Okay. You could rent a yacht and, go out with your friends and go in the Mediterranean Sea with a rented yacht for 3 or 4 days for $15,000. Do you know that you could go on a helicopter ride for $80 down the Carolinas?
Cheap.
And he was like, yeah, but I want to own it. I go, okay, well, that's a pride thing. Yeah. If the issue there is, yeah, okay, I could do that. I could have that experience, but I want to own it. Yeah. Okay, now we have a pride thing that we need to talk about, versus understanding that, okay, I want to do these things and I don't have to. There's a cheaper, more efficient way that I can do this. And recognizing that money is not what actually makes me happy. I'm trying to get to achieve and be able to do something that I wasn't able to do previously. And then figuring out, okay, so if that's what I actually want to do, now how can we get there? And how can we use where we want to get as our rewards along the way? If we know we're in this financial position, and say we're at a deficit in our budget. We're living paycheck to paycheck. We don't have any money in there. And so we need to cut expenses and we need to increase revenue. So we're going to sit down, we're going to look at that. And then in 6 months, we're going to look at it again and say, okay, did I increase my revenue and did I cut expenses? Where does my budget sit? And then once you have, and we'll define what a surplus you need is. It's $20 a paycheck, $100 a paycheck, whatever the case may be. And then once we get there, we're going to take, the first time you do that, we're going to take that surplus and we're going to go celebrate. We're going to go out to dinner. Because if you're playing at a deficit, you're not going out to eat, or you shouldn't be. And that's where we're going to cut the money from. Is we're going to make it so you can't eat out at all. You're buying all your groceries, you're cooking all your meals. But then the celebratory thing that you're going to do is you're going to buy that back because you just got the surplus in your budget to then celebrate. Because that's the key component here, is celebrating. If you're not celebrating, you will burn yourself out because you're not giving your caveman brain, your limbic brain, you're not teaching it that when I achieve these things, when I put myself through this pain, there's a reward at the end. If you just go through and you make these adjustments, you go from a deficit to break even, and you don't celebrate that, and you don't have to spend money to celebrate. Celebrating could be, okay, we're going to go for a family picnic in the park. And so you're still going to cook your meals, you're going to do all this stuff, but instead of eating at home, you're going to go for a hike and do it at the park. You can do that for free. You can do these things that, you don't have to spend money to have a celebration. But being able to celebrate your wins is what's going to allow your brain to continue to be hungry to do these things.
Definitely.
And you cannot reward yourself with the reward unless you actually do it.
Yeah. I think it's always crazy too, how it seems almost everything boils down to like the same answer, because what you were talking about before, you need to accept where you are. And I think part one is self-acceptance overall. We're talking health, we're talking finances, anything. And then know what you want. I look at both of those as not, one is not more important than the other. Like, you need both to be strong. And it would almost be great to have someone weekly be like, what do you want in life? Say finances, goals, because that gives you so many answers of, you can't work towards something if you don't know what you want. And it's very hard to know what you want. And even in the case of your cousin, like, does he want to own those things because he wants it, or does he want to own those things because it makes him look good? So that's such an important to differentiate too.
And that's the key. Like, what you're talking about there is, for sake of time, we didn't go into it deeper, but it was, again, okay, now you own the yacht, but you can't bring any friends on it. You're the only one who can use it.
Yeah.
It ends up being that you want the things that you can't buy. You want more time with your friends. You want more time with your family. You want more free time to do nothing. You want all these things. It's like, that's what you actually want.
Thanks for listening to our podcast.
We hope this helps you on your balance freedom journey.
Please share your thoughts in the comments section below.
Until next time, stay balanced.